Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're tackling a massive, honestly endlessly fascinating question. What does it actually mean to be American? To answer that, we're setting a pretty ambitious goal for ourselves. We're going to marry a brilliant 2007 sociological study on modern identity with literally tens of thousands of years of history. We're looking closely at exactly where we came from to understand who we are today.
Okay, let's dive into this with a quote that perfectly frames our whole journey. How much there is there? This is the actual title of a landmark study by Deborah J. Schildkraut out of Tufts University. She set out to investigate this core mystery of 21st century American identity. When you strip away the borders and the politics, is there a single definable Americanism that we all share?
The central premise of her study asks something incredibly relevant to all of us right now. As the United States becomes increasingly ethnically diverse, is the very definition of American identity fundamentally changing? Or, put another way, will an increasingly multicultural America inevitably create a multi-creedal America? A nation defined by lots of different, maybe even conflicting belief systems rather than just one. This isn't just an academic question. It directly impacts how we view our neighbors, our communities, and honestly, ourselves. So here's our roadmap for today. 1. The identity question. 2. The first inhabitants. 3. European colonization begins. 4. Multiple traditions theory. And 5. Defining us today. To answer this modern identity question, we've got to rewind deep into the past. Part 1. The first inhabitants. A continent of deep diversity. Our story starts way, way back, perhaps as early as 30,000 years ago. We've got early humans crossing the Beringia land bridge from Siberia right into present-day Alaska during the Ice Age. By 10,000 BCE, Paleoindians were fully established across the continent, hunting huge Ice Age megafauna like mammoths. But as those animals went extinct, these early societies adopted brilliantly. By 8,000 BCE, we see the very first farming in central Mexico, and by 3,000 BCE, that knowledge of agriculture spread northward, with corn growing in the valleys of Arizona and New Mexico. But even in these earliest millennia, the continent was absolutely never a monolith. Early Paleo-Indians were already diversifying into hundreds of distinct cultures. We can actually see this today by looking at their unique technologies, specifically their spear points. Take the Clovis culture, dating back to 9,100 BCE. They're famous for these fluted Clovis points. Meanwhile, the Folsom culture developed their own entirely distinct Folsom spear points. So you see, innovation and deep diversity were baked into the continent's DNA from the very beginning. Let's move ahead and see how this builds, because these early cultures soon evolved into incredibly complex, permanent settlements across vastly different regions. Around 900 BCE, you have the Anasazi constructing these amazing stone and adobe pueblos in the southwest. By 600 BCE, the Adena culture starts building massive earthwork mounds. Jump ahead to the 12th century CE, and the Mississippian civilization peaks at Cahokia. And by the mid-15th century, the highly structured Iroquois Confederacy forms in the northeast. Now, I want to pause on this number for just a second. 20,000. That was the estimated population of the Mississippian city of Cahokia back in the 12th century. To put that into perspective for you, that made this indigenous North American city larger than the population of London at the exact same time. It featured a massive 100-foot-tall earthwork called Monk's Mound, a complex class system, and vast agricultural and trading networks. And this brilliantly illustrates just how staggering the variety of traditions really was across the board. You've got the Anasazi in the southwest, literally building apartment-like structures right into cliff faces. Out on the West Coast, Pacific Northwest cultures are thriving on salmon fishing and throwing these complex gift-giving potlatch feasts. Up in the Northeast, the Iroquois formed a political confederacy of 5 distinct tribes represented by 50 sachem chiefs, a political structure, some suggest, actually influenced early U.S. government thinking. And in Puerto Rico, you had tens of thousands of Taino people led by a single cacique chief. The sheer diversity of lifestyle, politics, and culture was massive. That brings us to part 2, European colonization begins, a collision of cultures. Now, the chronological arrival of Europeans actually stretches back a bit further than a lot of people realize. As early as 1075 CE, the chronicler Adam of Bremen wrote about Vinland, referencing Norse exploration of North America. But, of course, the major wave of contact came later. In 1493, the Spanish encounter the Taino in Puerto Rico. The British followed quite a bit later, setting up Jamestown in 1607, and then the Mayflower Pilgrims landed in Plymouth in 1620. Tragically, as we know, this contact brought Eurasian diseases like smallpox, which caused massive epidemics that completely decimated the indigenous populations who had absolutely no immunity, fundamentally disrupting these ancient societies. Now, it's also absolutely crucial to remember that early European America was not a monolith either. Colonization wasn't some unified front. It involved multiple, fiercely competing global empires bringing their own totally distinct traditions, languages, and legal systems to the table. You had the Spanish establishing a strong presence down in Florida, Texas, and New Mexico. You had the Dutch in New Netherland, which we now call New York. The French held these vast territories and outposts. And all of this was happening right alongside the British 13 colonies. So, to summarize this whole historical deep dive, the indisputable fact is this. A multi-creedal reality isn't just some modern political talking point. It has quite literally always been part of this land's DNA. Let's pivot to part 3, multiple traditions theory, bridging past and present. So the crucial point here is defining the multiple traditions theory. It's a sociological perspective asserting that American identity isn't just one simple thing. Instead, it's defined by a broad, complex, and honestly, sometimes completely contradictory set of norms. And that incredible layered history of indigenous diversity and competing colonial powers that we just walked through, that perfectly sets the stage for why this modern academic framework even exists today. Moving right along to part 4. Defining us today, the empirical evidence. When Schildkraut actually crunched the numbers and analyzed the data, she found exactly what the multiple traditions theory predicts. She discovered that it is incredibly difficult to reduce all these complex cultural norms into a single neat measure of Americanism. Identity is messy, right? It's contradictory. It stubbornly refuses to be boxed into just one creed, directly echoing that wildly diverse history of the continent itself. Now, what's really interesting about this is that within all that complexity, Schildkraut actually found a surprising consensus. A broad range of norms absolutely exist, but it turns out most Americans actually share this complex view. And critically, this shared understanding is super consistent across varying ethnic backgrounds. It holds true regardless of whether someone has a recent immigrant background or not. So, despite our deep diversity, modern Americans broadly agreed that being American just means embracing a complex, multifaceted identity. The overarching takeaway here is profoundly powerful. Our deep, diverse history, stretching all the way from the Paleoindians and the architectural marvels of the Anasazi straight through to those competing European empires, it perfectly contextualizes our modern multi-creedal reality. The sociology of today directly mirrors the history of the past 30,000 years. But Schildkraut's study does leave us with a final warning and a really important question to ponder. She notes that while we currently share this complex identity, there are empirical signs of divergence just starting to appear in the data. So the question I want to leave you with today is this. If we broadly share this complex identity today, what are the signs of divergence we really must monitor tomorrow? As our demographics continue to shift, how is this ancient tapestry going to adapt next? Definitely something to think about. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring.